radiation exposure and that much more damage to you and to your family.
There's been an evolution. I've done these shows with you over the years. There's been an evolution, it seems like, in thinking. But are there, how can I say, are the risks at the power plant, and are they increasing to us? Because we've gone as an evolutionary look at what could be done to make it safer, to do all these things, to the point of calling for it to close, right?
Exactly.
So have the risks been increasing?
Without a doubt.
Okay.
And we've done a number of programs on this. There's a lot of information on the ACE website about the risks. Just to suggest a couple of categories, what's happened here. Well, this plant, has been around for quite some time, since the mid-'80s. So the plant's getting older, the equipment's getting older, things are aging, things are deteriorating. We know that there are structural flaws. There were materials, substandard materials used during the construction. So the plant itself is problematic as it ages. Another thing that's happened is, we talked about this at the top of the hour, population has increased tremendously in this area.
Right, that's a big thing.
That's an enormous factor right there. Then we also know that we've seen increased risks of earthquakes. We did a program about earthquake risk. We're now ranked 3rd in the country in terms of risk for damage from an earthquake. Another factor that's happened is we're talking about hundreds of miles of underground pipes and cables that are really difficult to inspect. Even with the best possible intentions, you still have accidents. We just had that enormous spill in March of 2012. Right. Nobody planned for that at the plant. I mean, that wasn't done on purpose, but that was problematic. So yeah, the risks have increased over time on multiple levels, and the protection has not made commensurate increases.
The fact that the information is delayed to get to us, and when it is reported, most times it's reported as almost like an innocuous event. The NRC has said, or the power plant has said, that there's really no danger to the public, no one should be concerned. So we don't really know the details and really what the real impact of those things are. We have to take what they tell us, and when it's reported in the paper or on the news, it's a capsulized version. We have no idea what actually took place and what the consequences of that could be.
Exactly. As we've said in some previous programs, there's this whole construct, this whole industry was built on a set of premises and assumptions that have not held up over time, obviously. There's plenty of evidence that if there is a problem, there's a better chance that people are going to turn off radiation monitors than leave them on, for example. We've seen that in a couple of instances. Now we're to the point where industry has been buying science. We talked about science for sale. I want to talk about a recent study that was done at MIT, sponsored by the nuclear industry, paid for by the government, that claimed, I want you to make sure you hear this clearly, Nick. I want to make sure our viewers hear this clearly, because we had to look at this twice and reread it very carefully. This study claimed that there was, one, no need to evacuate after a disaster in the U.S. Okay. No need to evacuate. No need to evacuate. Think about that for a second. And then it also said there would be no harm following a disaster in the U.S. Let me. I'm sure that shocked you as much as it shocked me. That study from MIT is an insult to common sense.
Absolutely.
And good science, in my judgment. A couple of things happened here. This study, if you look at it, were it not so potentially harmful, is almost humorous, Nick. This study totally ignored all of the pre-existing information and knowledge about the effects of radiation exposure. They basically just ignored it.
What kind of justification could they have for saying there is no evacuation needed?
Well, I don't want to speak to all of their motivations, but I think the short answer is funding dollars.
Okay.
Okay, a lot of money, millions of dollars in funds that go to that particular university. They've acknowledged, they've openly admitted that they have a relationship speaking on behalf of the industry. Some critics have called them cheerleaders for the nuclear industry. So it's all about money, it's all about funding, it's all about research, viability. A couple of things that they did with this study was they looked at a small number of mice. Their sample was a small number of mice. They looked at those mice for a period of 35 days, and they looked at exposure to very low levels of radiation. Totally ignored all of the available evidence on humans following Chernobyl. So this particular study has been discredited and debunked, pretty aggressively as soon as it was unveiled, because the obvious purpose of this research is to hand it to the NRC, to hand it to the federal government, to hand it to the nuclear industry, and let them wave it around and say, oh, look, here's a study that says no problem.
So it's a way for them to pat themselves on the back, that they're doing everything that they should have to do. But I mean, even common sense would say that that's a stupid study. Yeah. Pardon my language, but it is. I mean, it's ridiculous. Anybody with an ounce of brain power, unless of course they've already been affected by nuclear energy, wouldn't come up with a study like that.
Oh, of course. That's a perfect example of what we've called in previous programs and in previous years, science for sale at its worst. And that's a very prestigious institution. MIT is a very prestigious institution.
When an institution like that lends credence to a particular idea, people are apt to listen to it as if it's the gospel.
Exactly. Exactly. You raised a question a short time ago, Nick, that I addressed initially that I want to get back to. Why, as the risks increase, do we see protection decreasing?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, the NRC, as we've said in some previous programs, is an unabashed partner in promoting nuclear power in this country. So they are, in essence, cheerleaders for nuclear power. So as threats increase, including all of the things that we should have learned from Fukushima, the NRC is basically saying, we think we're going to, back off. We're going to ratchet all of our protection down. They said things, like they really don't think we need an updated safety analysis. No need for that. Let's just go with something that was done in the 1970s. Good enough, safe enough. These are their kinds of terms. They have actually weakened standards and requirements. We've covered this pretty aggressively over the last 12 years. As an industry and as a government agency, the NRC was referred to as perhaps the most severely compromised federal agency in existence. Every time I read that, see that, or hear that, I think, how is that possible? How could anyone be worse than FEMA in terms of the response to Katrina?
Right.
Well, there are experts who have a whole lot more expertise than I have who have said NRC is without doubt the worst federal agency in existence. So they've weakened standards, they've weakened requirements. We've done programs about this in the past. They've actually hidden radiation risks from the public. They were complicit with, the most recent escapade, the 23 days of hidden information. Right. They knew about it within hours. 23 days later, the public finds out. They've actually taken the position that they want to pare down evacuation plans and pare down evacuation drills. I want people to think about that. I mean, this is an agency that obviously is not serving you, the folks who are watching this program. This is an agency that serves the industry, the nuclear industry.
It seems like it's the exact opposite of what should be taking place. Okay, so after we had the financial crisis in 2008, there was a movement toward creating greater controls with the SEC and a number of the agencies and the banks and all that stuff. And so after an event, usually the rules get tighter, right?
That's true.
Here, what they're doing, the NRC, is, okay, we had Fukushima, right? And now the rules in the United States are going to get looser. I mean, isn't that supposed to be the warning sign that what happened there, especially when the designs of some of the plants are similar to the ones here,
right,
that the rules should be tighter,
exactly,
that there should be more watchdogs, that people are keeping an eye on this, but we're going the exact opposite of that. That makes no sense. It's counterintuitive. It's illogical to do that.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's a sad commentary. It's really pathetic to see how compromised this agency is. I mean, this agency has been so captured by the nuclear industry that they serve the nuclear industry. Let me just give you a couple of quick examples of what's happened. Well, they've said, okay, let's take a look at what happened at Fukushima, and let's go in the opposite direction. Let's go backwards. I compare this to an elected official or an agency official who gets in a vehicle and knowingly drives the wrong way on a one-way street, saying, "Get out of my way! Get out of my way!" You know, I know what I'm doing. You know, as they're risking catastrophe, literally every moment that they're behind the wheel, and that's what these guys are doing. The NRC has actually advocated and is promoting right now fewer exercises for emergency events. Fewer, Nick, exactly what you just said. Fewer people would be immediately evacuated. Fewer people would actually be evacuated if the NRC gets their way and the nuclear industry gets their way. There would be no practicing whatsoever. You raised a question about a full drill.
Right, like a drill, right.
There used to be what I call partial drills. They're saying no practicing for any significant release of radiation. No need to practice because their position is it can't happen. Okay. Hello, NRC, if you're listening, have you heard of TMI, Chernobyl, or Fukushima? What could you possibly be thinking? Or, as I like to say sometimes, what could possibly go wrong here? You know?
So they're thinking, in other words, all these plans are in place because they don't think it can ever happen, but it's a just in case.
Yeah.
But they don't really actually believe that it will happen.
Correct.
Okay.
Or they're saying with a straight face that they don't believe it will happen.
Well, belief is one thing. Reality is something else, right? They may not believe that it will happen, but we have reality experiences to prove that it does happen.
You bet.
The three that you mentioned.
Yeah. And another part of this picture is somewhere between disheartening and despicable, and that is these people know full well that if they do this, they're likely to get away with and evade and avoid responsibility and liability for a whole lot of bad things that could happen here.
Yeah. So, I mean, are there any, besides you guys, that we all know about because I'm part of the show with you, but besides you guys, are there public voices that have spoken against this so that you're not like a
voice in the wilderness.
A voice in the wilderness, exactly,
No, I think there are people who are beginning to understand this, who are beginning to conclude, something needs to be done. And probably, the most notable or the largest, most visible people include our U.S. Senator Bob Casey.
Okay.
Bob Casey has raised these issues. He's talked about evacuation, which is directly on message with what we're going to do for the remainder of this program today. He has said clearly that we need to have better evacuation plans, more comprehensive evacuation plans, bigger evacuation zones. And we need to do a much better job. So anybody out there who has not thanked Bob Casey might want to do so in the not too distant future and encourage him to stay on this topic. Another major group, national organization, the NRDC, we talked about this in some previous programs, has brought actions about, the need for updated safety analyses and those kinds of things, which the NRC, has fought pretty vigorously. There was also a recent court decision that we'll be talking about in some future programs that we know that the industry and the NRC is going to resist. They have resisted every logical, reasonable, protective imperative that's been out there.
So again, it comes down to what we do here every week on the show, and that is getting the word out to the public. Because apparently, from what we've been talking about, the government isn't here really to protect us. The public has to be informed. They have to have alternatives. I know we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on, the kinds of choices that people can make for themselves to protect themselves as best as you can. We'll be talking about those things later on in the show, folks. But you're watching the ACE Report here on the TV station here at PCTV. And we do this every Tuesday night at this time. So we're glad that you're with us tonight and that you're just joining us. We're talking about being ready for the possibility of something taking place at the nuclear power plant, the things that you can do to protect yourself and protect your family. And I'm here with Dr. Lou Cuthbert. As I mentioned earlier, Donna Cuthbert will be along with us in a little while. So I want to get back into this. Where do you want to go with this next?
Just a couple of thoughts here, and I think we can probably close this part of the program. There are people with some other international organizations who have reached many of the same conclusions we have about what needs to happen and how we should be doing it and those kinds of things. Jim Riccio of Greenpeace said something that resonated with us, as it did with a lot of folks. You need to be practicing for a worst case rather than a non-event. The regulators and the industry would basically have us believe, can't happen here, you don't need to be prepared, don't practice for anything. Greenpeace has said, yeah, you really need to be prepared. And a couple of other thoughts would be, If you haven't been to the ACE website recently, you probably want to go take a look at that, www.acereport.org. There's a whole section you can download that tells you why the evacuation plan that we have is not going to serve you. That's section number 16. And there's a whole section that you can look at on emergency planning. If you get to watch this program more than once, or if you DVR it or make a videotape of it, you can also go to the homepage and look at